Good afternoon or good morning, depending on the time zone that you might be tuning in from today. Welcome back to another session at Fintech Nexus, how to future-proof your fraud detection. Before I pass to Louise and our esteemed group of panelists, just a couple of short announcements. First, special thanks to Louise and the team at Inscribe. They've been longtime partners and supporters. Obviously, we can't do a lot of what we do without partnership and support. And so we greatly appreciate the continued support from the Inscribe team. Also, thank you to our speakers. Every speaker that comes gives us their time, their energy. And so we appreciate that. We know how busy everyone is. So the special thanks to all of our speakers as well. And obviously to the audience, whether you're watching live now, and if you are watching live, we do encourage you to ask questions. So don't be shy. Ask it 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, 20 minutes in. Just go ahead and click the Q&A box and input your question. Or if you're watching or listening after the fact, we want to thank you. Obviously, we can't do a lot of these sessions without an audience. So we greatly appreciate your time as well. And just a quick announcement coming up in May, just about a month away, a little bit under a month now, May 10th and 11th, Fintech Nexus USA. Get your tickets. Next week, the prices will go up, so make sure you get your tickets today. Just go to fintechnexus.com for all details. That is enough from me. I'm going to pass to Louise and our esteemed panel. Louise, take it away and enjoy the show.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you to everyone in our audience for deciding to spend some time with us today. We are here to talk about how to future-proof your fraud detection. We've got a really exciting conversation lined up where we'll talk about fraud detection priorities, strategies for staying ahead of emerging trends, but we'll also dive into how artificial intelligence or AI can bolster fraud detection efforts. Today, I am honored to be joined by some really knowledgeable experts in the field. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Rowan, let's start with you, and then we can pass to Eric and Jaime.
Sure. Hi, I'm Rohan Sriram. I'm a product manager at Plaid. For those that are unfamiliar, Plaid is a fintech API company and a leading provider of open banking data and insights.
Awesome. Hi, folks. My name is Eric Greenstein. I work for Modern Treasury. I'm also in product there. Modern Treasury is a software vendor or payment operating system. We integrate with banks, provide APIs that customers can use to programmatically move money around, give customers visibility into payments, balances, help automate reconciliation, other tools for payments operation teams. We've also started to build out tools around ledgering, and I work on, more recently, we've launched tools for compliance and fraud. My background's in the security space originally.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jaime Nunez. I'm with Lendflow. We are a fintech startup focused on embedded lending. And we have an embedded lending marketplace and a credit decisioning engine where we enable companies to start their own credit programs by partnering with companies like Inscribe here and a few other vendors.
Thank you so much for those intros. So I'd like to start us off today at a high level. I think that we're all in agreement that reducing losses and mitigating fraud is more important than ever in our current environment. We know that fraud is increasing. And there's actually some recent data from Verif that shows that in 2022 alone, financial services companies saw a 79% increase in document fraud. And in challenging or uncertain economic times, such as we're seeing right now, companies tend to decrease their risk exposure by fortifying their fraud defenses. Later in the session, we can chat through what you all are prioritizing right now in terms of anti-fraud strategies or solutions. But first, I'd love to hear your overall approach to fraud detection. Rohan, could you speak to your overall approach?
Yeah, sure. At Plaid, I think our focus has always been to give our customers high quality data and also data that's high fidelity, right? That they can directly use in any kind of decisioning. I mean, we started with integrating with banks, and that's data coming directly from the source. So there's a lot more fidelity in terms of what data we're providing. But as we've expanded to newer use cases, we've gone to more verticals, and we started dealing with more data that we're getting from other sources and not directly from the source of record. I think that's when fraud becomes more important, and we started thinking about embedding fraud in most of our products. I think there are 3 areas in which we help our customers with fraud. The first is our ID verification product, which at its core is really about, are you who you say you are? Like, that's really what we help our customers answer. We also have a payments risk product, which is really focused on managing ACH risk. And then finally, we also have a product in our credit space. We launched an income verification product that helps our customers verify income and employment information pretty easily. And one of the new features we added as part of that solution set is an ability to identify document fraud, which is something that we work with Inscribe to launch. So I think that's kind of how we support our customers across a wide spectrum of use cases across credit, payments, and ID verification. So fraud is top of mind for everybody. And I think as we move away from actually getting data from the source, we've really focused on embedding fraud into our products.
Thanks, Ron. Eric, it would be great to hear from you next.
Yes, thanks, Louise. So Modern Treasury also provides tools that customers use for fraud and compliance. I think about fraud as you can catch it in multiple different layers. You can catch it when users are first signing up for an application, so doing KYC, KYB. You can catch things when they're linking bank accounts, maybe using Plaid, for example, doing bank account validation. You can also catch it when money's moving, so doing transaction monitoring. There's all these different layers that you could find people in attacks. And so having sort of defense in depth, different signals that you're using and all these layers to prevent fraud is really important. I was thinking with fraud is a cat and mouse game. Attacks are always changing. You have to just stay on top of the latest techniques. And so kind of following the data, talking to your customers, seeing what's out there is really important.
What's your approach to fraud at LendIt, Jaime?
I think we might be a little bit different. So we have an approach when in our lending marketplace, for example, what we do is we screen leads that go to lenders. We have a network of around like 90 different lenders, ranging from alternative lenders to some more established banks across a variety of products. And what we do is we screen those leads for them. So we do a little bit of KYBing and KYCing, cash flow analysis, where we look at the bank statements, where we look at whether those bank statements have been altered. So in that sense, I think we do kind of like a high level check, because at the end of the day, those lenders will do their own risk underwriting on their end. But we do use KYC, KYB tools, and then tools to do cash flow analysis, where we analyze if the bank statements have been tampered with. And then on the other end, for companies that are using our credit decision engine to build their own credit products, we are very focused on credit issuance. So of course, like our 3 main things are identity verification, making sure that identity is not been stolen, or it's a synthetic identity that doesn't exist. Or then again, we look at the documents as well to make sure that nothing there has been altered. So those are the 3 things I'd say we prioritize from our end, since we're very focused on credit.
Awesome. It's great to get an understanding of how you all think about fraud detection. One of the big things we want to talk about here today is how to future-proof your fraud detection. How do you ensure that your anti-fraud strategies and systems are able to stay ahead of fraudsters instead of them becoming outdated and making you vulnerable? I think it was, Eric that said the tactics are always consistently changing, and like the technology is always evolving. One of the biggest ways that many companies have focused on to accomplish this is by using artificial intelligence. I think that we can all agree that AI is such a buzzword these days. I feel like everyone's talking about DALL-E and ChatGPT. I feel like that's just all over the headlines these days. And it's still a fairly new technology, particularly in the financial services industry. We actually did some user testing on our website a while back, and we had someone say, what on earth does AI actually mean? What is it? There are definitely so many interesting and exciting implications for what AI can do to enhance fraud detection. But, first, I'd be really interested to hear how each of you would explain what AI is. Eric, if you had to explain to your grandmother, what would you say?
That's a fun one. I think AI is all about teaching computers how to think like humans. And us humans are really good at finding patterns based on the experiences that we've had in the real world. And so AI is all about teaching computers that. And so it's about giving computers large amounts of data, maybe telling them what's like good or bad in the data in the case of fraud, or just giving them big amounts of stuff and having them sort through it and finding commonalities. And it's super helpful in the fraud world, because you're just getting tons and tons of data all over the place and trying to find signals and patterns in there.
What's your take on it, Jaime?
I guess if we'd have to go with the how do I explain this to my grandma approach, I would say we're teaching machines how to think like humans and make decisions like humans, right? And they, like Eric was mentioning, that's done by providing these algorithms with very vast amounts of data that they can use as the input to refine that decision making process. And I think in our space, something like machine learning is something that's really one of the, I guess, verticals of machine learning that plays a role in KYC and KYB and identity verification.
And Rowan, how about you?
Yeah, I think both Jaime and Eric kind of hit the nail on the head here. I think it's really about, from my perspective, it's, an AI or machine learning can basically look at huge amounts of data, basically derive patterns like what most humans could. I think many times they actually do a better job than humans because, there's definitely natural limitations to our cognitive abilities in terms of finding patterns. So I think it's really, look at lots of data, find these patterns, and actually, I think, use those patterns in a way in which we can make, better decisions and, in a variety of use cases. I think that's the way I kind of think about what AI is.
Yeah, those are all like excellent explanations of what AI is at like a very kind of ground level. The way I kind of like try and explain it is, when you think about an algorithm, what's an algorithm? Like it's basically just a set of instructions, like a recipe for cooking a meal or a manual for like fixing a car. And AI is a program that uses these algorithms to learn from data, as you all have said, and it makes decisions based on that data. So like at Inscribe, we train models with data that has been labeled. So for example, we'll tell the algorithm what a fraudulent document looks like and what a trustworthy document looks like. We can let the model ingest like all of those different features about each type of document, and then the model tries to predict whether or not the document is fraudulent. It'll ask us, is this fraudulent? And we say, yes, this is fraudulent, or no, it's not. And the model then gets better and better at actually predicting whether the document is fraudulent. Like a really like simple example is like trying to think of it as if it's like a baby, and the baby's like learning different animals, and they'll point to a cat and they'll say doggy, and you'll say no, that's cat, and then yes, that's a doggy when it actually is a dog. If you think about that in like an AI sense, like a model could be trained on a data set with images of cats and dogs, and then you could use that model then to classify like new unseen images as cats and dogs. In terms of incorporating AI into your fraud detection strategy, how do you decide when to build AI fraud detection in-house and when to buy AI fraud detection? Eric, how about you?
If I was like a customer asking this question, I'd think of a few, I'd ask you a few questions. So one is like, do you have in-house expertise? I think it's really important to have the right people and the right talent there. I've actually even worked at companies on doing AI. We haven't had the right team in place, and it's made it really, really hard. I'd also ask yourself if you have unique data. You definitely need data to train these models. And so if you don't have enough data or interesting data, it might be very hard for you. I also think about, is this a differentiator for your business? If it is, maybe it's worth investing in. If it's not, you might not want to spend the time there. Overall, I'm probably biased to think that experts are best suited for providing tools around fraud and compliance. We can use data from many, many customers, more data than you might have by yourself. We also have big teams of people who just focus on this 100% for their jobs. It's our core competency, and it might not be the core competency for you.
Jaime, do you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I do. I think Eric mentioned, I think the most important thing that came to mind when you asked the question, which is you do need a lot of like deep expertise to do this. And maybe your company doesn't have the resources. And that's, I guess, when vendors come in and not only to build your models, but to maintain them, right? So, and keep up with, what's happening. So if you partner with vendors, I guess you have that aspect of your strategy covered. And then for us as a marketplace too, one of the things that we think about is, okay, if you have your own internal, if you build versus buying, I guess, you can control what's happening. But everybody relies on APIs these days. So if you're partnering with a vendor to do this, what happens if that API goes down, for example, right? So you might want to have like multiple alternatives, which is kind of like when a marketplace, helps out. And yeah, I think that those are my main thoughts about it. And also the other thing, I guess, would be there's kind of like in my view, an economy of scale type situation where like some of the vendors that you partner with, like we were mentioning before, AI is kind of like as good as the data that it ingests. So like some other partners might have like massive amounts of data because they work with like hundreds of companies, and they can tap on that data that you may not have access to if you build in-house, for example. So I think those are some of the thoughts that kind of come to mind when answering that question.
Yeah, that's such a great point about like reliability. Like it's just so important for a company to be able to trust that. And yeah, another great point about the quality of the data. It's such a common phrase to hear: rubbish in, rubbish out. If you're going to give rubbish data to a model, those predictions are not worth their salt, basically. How do you approach it at Plaid, Rowan?
Yeah, but before I go into that, I want to just kind of follow up on one comment you made on the algorithms on the AI, in terms of, you're giving a set of instructions for the computer to actually, find patterns. I think one thing where I think the current AI techniques have kind of really gone beyond that, where I think we've kind of lost an understanding of, okay, why is it behaving a particular way? Especially like I've been reading a bunch of articles on ChatGPT. It's like kind of, how is it actually kind of working? And I think there's a little bit of distinction when it comes to, I think fraud less so, but more even when we talk about credit, where I think we need to understand like kind of where these patterns are coming from, because that becomes like very important. So I thought that was just something I want to bring out, just in terms of distinction between an algorithm, and I think where some of the AI techniques have kind of gone way beyond just a set of instructions for a computer. Coming back to this question, I think at Plaid, the way we think about it is we listen to our customers, right? So our customers tell us like what the biggest problems they're facing. And then, we look both internally and externally in terms of, what's the best way we can solve this problem. That's kind of where we start. And AI, I think, is just a tool in the toolbox. Like we're not saying like we want to find an AI solution to a problem. So we start with a problem, and then if AI, if AI techniques are one of the best ways to solve the problem, then I think that's something we would absolutely pursue, because I think our guiding principle is always like, how do I solve this problem as quickly as possible for the customer? And there's obviously going to be some constraints around like, how quickly you want the solution up and running, what are the economics of whatever solution you're offering, and so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of where we start. And then, let's say, something like our partnership with Inscribe, the problem we had was, we need to find fraud documents, and we need to solve that very, very quickly. And to do that in-house, first we needed to build up a repository of, bad docs, so we can tell the computer like, this is good, this is bad. And that was going to take some time. So I think one of the biggest determinants for us to actually move forward, with a partnership, was just the fact that we need to move very quickly. This was a bleeding concern for our customers. We needed a solution yesterday. And I think, that was one of the important things, and was how quickly we can get a product out.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. It's such a good one around the idea of like explainability. We always kind of tell our risk leaders to try and look for AI products that have explainability. And when I say that, I basically mean, it's not a black box. You can see how certain predictions or decisions were made and what the rationale behind those decisions were. And in like, industries like financial services or industries like healthcare, like that is just so important. We actually have like our trust score in Inscribe, and that's an AI model. And that like takes in different detector signals that we found. It takes in information about how familiar we are with the document type, with the specific like document provider. It takes in like the severity of all the fraud results, and it makes a determination about the trustworthiness of that document, just like how a human investigator would if they were looking at the document. And the nice thing about it is that you can use Inscribe's web app to see exactly what's been altered on the document and kind of get more information about like how we came to that decision, and to kind of give it, you know, a certain trust score. You can see if like image editing software has been used, and so on, and you can kind of decide whether you agree with like the AI determination, or whether you want to make your own. Yeah, and like I know like a lot of you have like touched on the idea about having good quality data, and that's, you know, that's another thing that we advise people to partner with vendors that have the most data about whatever fraud vector they're detecting. The more data an AI model is trained on, the smarter it becomes, basically. So for example, if you're looking for a tool to detect transaction fraud, you'll want to find a partner with access to a massive amount of transaction data. And in Inscribe, we have the industry's largest document database, so our models are able to benefit from like the context of all of those documents. A lot of, you know, document fraud solutions will rely on document forensics, like looking for like text masking or what the software was, and they'll basically use that in kind of like a rules-based system. But these kind of systems are like pretty limited. You know, Rohan made the point about like trying to like maybe start off with like a simple solution. Like that's always how like we approach things as well. Like you would never want to over-engineer the solution, you know, throw something really complex and expensive at something if it doesn't need it. But the problem with like a lot of real world like challenges is that like a simple rules-based system is not going to be able to capture like the complexity and the nuance in a lot of these problems. Like if you think about problems like making medical diagnoses or recognizing objects and images, and we need to like, you know, we need to look at a solution that's more complex than just like a set of rules written by a human. You know, and that's where AI actually comes in, and our AI models that Inscribe are able to benefit from the network effects of the millions of documents that we're processing from across our customer base every month. But yeah, the technology continues to evolve, and there's like constantly new trends emerging, it seems like every month or so. So it would be really interesting to hear like what your roadmap looks like for fraud detection. You know, Jaime, how do you keep tabs on emerging fraud trends, and when do you decide, you know, that it needs to be a priority?
I guess for us, that approach is kind of like twofold, because we, like, you know, like I mentioned a couple of times, and we have those two different areas of our company. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to relationships for us. I mean, it's not like we have somebody sitting there, you know, in front of a computer, just, you know, researching this constantly. So it's really handy to have relationships with, on the one hand, all of the lenders that we have that can tell us what they're experiencing, you know, kind of like in real time. It's like, okay, this is how are things going on? What's happening? Are you guys encountering a lot of fraud? You know, and what type of fraud? And then the other thing is, you know, having relationships with, you know, vendors like you guys, where we have like regular syncs, and then, you know, we hear about what you guys are building and why. So I think we really benefit from having those relationships. And then, of course, you know, whenever we onboard a new prospect or something and learn a little bit more about their use case and what they want to do, sometimes they'll bring up things that maybe we didn't have in the radar, right? So it's like we want to make sure that we have an alternative to screen for this or that. And we'll dig into it, and it may be something that we can utilize also across our current customer base. But I guess in summary, it's going to be the relationships that we have really help us, you know, be on top of what's going on.
That's so interesting. Rohan, I'd love to hear from you next.
Yeah, for us at Plaid, I think it's very similar. We have tight feedback loops with our customers, which, you know, serves as a very important mechanism for us to hear about new fraud trends. We also have, you know, have certain strategic relationships where, you know, we have one-to-one, you know, product conversations, or, you know, we bring in, you know, risk analysts from the team that we talk on a regular basis, just so that we also get a ground sense of, you know, what is going on. So, for example, on the document fraud piece, we actually, you know, had a recurring meeting where we would have a an analyst from from one of our customers actually shared like, hey, these are 5 examples of fraudulent documents that we found. This is something that we think the current solution isn't capturing. So what's a good way in which we can feed this information back into whatever modeling or risk techniques you have, so that going forward these kind of frauds don't slip through the cracks. So I think that having that kind of a tight feedback loop is something that's been very effective for us. As Hami mentioned, right, there is like, we don't have one person sitting at a computer like researching fraud trends and then things popping up. You just have to keep your eyes and ears open in terms of things you hear from multiple sources. One thing which you mentioned, which is kind of I think very similar to Plaid, is this concept of a network. I know you said Inscribe now has like the largest database of fraudulent documents, and that's something you collect by processing documents for so many different customers. I think that's one of the things that we think at Plaid we have a strength, which is the concept of the Plaid network. If you think about like Plaid, we have 1 in 3 Americans have connected a bank account through Plaid. We have relationships with many financial institutions, and then we also power like thousands of fintech apps. So kind of actually we can see like trends across the entire network. I think that's a very powerful thing to think about, especially when it comes to things like fraud, where a lot of times it's you're blind because a lot of the data is in silos. So for example, if fraudsters typically are attempting the same fraud on multiple customers at the same time. So if you're seeing just a particular device for the first time, you don't really know if it's fraudulent, but at a Plaid level, you can actually see that wait a minute, this device is kind of something is fishy here. I can see this behavior across like multiple customers. I think that's where the network effect gets really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. That's so powerful. And I loved your point about, having those really close like feedback loops. And at Inscribe, we certainly benefit from having like really close feedback loops with our customers, like with Plaid or LendFlow or the likes. Eric, would you like to expand on that or offer a different perspective when it comes to your roadmap for fraud detection?
Yeah, I think I'll echo a lot of the points that Jaime and Rohan mentioned. So Rohan was talking about kind of device and behavior techniques. Is something we found is super helpful as well. Are you seeing tons of customers logging in from the same IP address or the same device or the same email or phone number? How do you see this behavior kind of across lots of customers, or what are fraudsters actually going to do? I think we're also kind of like Jaime mentioned and Rohan mentioned, making just like incremental movements to make our fraud engines better. That's really working closely with customers, just digging into the data about how our customers doing decisioning, what ACH returns are we seeing, what fraud are we seeing. And then for us, some of the bigger items on our roadmap around helping customers with international KYC and KYB, we've heard is pretty important. So kind of expanding who we can help with. And we're also iterating on our kind of tooling and case management that we provide for analysts too, and making sure those workflows are really smooth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'd like to get to the heart of the webinar topic today. I think one of the most important things that you can do to future-proof your fraud detection is to stay ahead of emerging fraud tactics and trends. And like we said before, AI can be, extremely helpful here. And, at Inscribe, the more and more data we have, the smarter our AI becomes, and the better we're able to identify new tactics being used by fraudsters. We actually have a 2023 document fraud report coming out next month. With kind of, the different kind of trends that we experienced in the last year. And everyone who has registered for the webinar will get a complimentary copy of this report. So yes, one of the last things I would love to hear from our panelists is what fraud detection strategies or solutions you are prioritizing right now or have recently prioritized. Jaime, is there anything in particular you've been prioritizing?
Yeah, I think this kind of like ties back well with that, I guess, first question that you were asking at the beginning. And yeah, it's mainly 3 things, well, or 2 things, like identity and document verification. And also how those things like kind of like tie together, right? Because like Rohan was mentioning before, sometimes like this, vendors have complex ways of, outputting some sort of like score or result, right? So it's oftentimes our clients are like, okay, this is great, but what am I to do with this, right? I have like, 5 or 6 scores, multiple reasons why these scores are, giving me a fraud alert, but I don't really know where to go from here, right? So I think some of that ties back to, okay, having clear procedures around what happens after something seems fishy, right? And you might be entirely certain, but you also want to avoid false positives. So what happens in those scenarios? And do you have like well-established kind of like dog-v processes where you can verify identities, providing your customer a reasonable experience? So I think on our end, it's identity verification to prevent theft or synthetic identities, and then document verification. And I think one of the things in terms of kind of like best practices, and I think this is something where Inscribe has been particularly useful for us, is some providers out there, when it comes to document verification, will tell you that a document has been tampered with, but they might not go into a lot of detail. So then you end up having to have a human look at it and make a decision on it, which you're trying to avoid, or you trust that fraudulent alert like 100%. But that's sometimes tricky. So for example, when we use you guys, we know exactly at which point in a document something's going on. So okay, the fonts have been altered, or metadata on a particular file doesn't match, and oftentimes it's a combination of 2 things that makes you realize that this is definitely fraud. So I think for anybody considering kind of like getting a solution to screen for fraudulent documents, you want to choose a solution that provides that detail, because it's just going to make your life a lot easier. And I think, from LendFlow's standpoint, those are the 3 things. And we keep evolving, we keep adding things to our roadmap, moving quickly. We're a startup, so that's part of our charm. And the other thing I would say that's pretty critical is the turnaround times, right? And this depends on the use cases, but like you need services that will give you output and answer very quick. Often, like you cannot be waiting. It depends on the use case, right? But for us, sometimes when you're dealing with B2B lending, and it's maybe a smaller ticket size, time is of the essence often. So like if you are screening this documents and don't get an answer in 30 minutes, that may be something that might, impact considerably your conversion rates. And I think the last thing I'll say in terms of the approach is how important it is to invest in this type of tools, because the pros versus the cons are very evident. But again, it depends on the use case, right? But like, for example, if you're thinking about like B2B lending, a couple of bad apples can make your entire portfolio like unprofitable. So I have a few examples where we've spotted fraud at the very end. Like Eric was saying before, like sometimes you start at the beginning with KYC, sometimes you do this at the very end, and that might be a question of cost. But if you can spot something that might have a serious impact in your economics at a low price that makes sense for you, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. So those are some high-level thoughts on best practices and where we, LendFlow, are going as a company, I guess.
Yeah, there's some really, really great points. Eric, I'd love to hear what you have been prioritizing.
Yeah, I'll maybe take us in a different direction of like best practices and thinking about if you're building like fraud products, like how do you do that? And I think some things that we've done is like just be really close to the data, be really rigorous, but like every week looking at our metrics, like trying to see what are like the 5 things that we care about. If things are going up, things are going down, being able to dig into why. And then for our developers, like how do we have great tooling that helps them iterate really quickly? So is it really easy to get a training data set? Is it really easy to create new features? Is it really easy to test those features against all that data? Can you spot like differences between your models? And I think just like investing in those areas around kind of both your data and like your tooling, it's super important to make yourself like efficient and stay on top of things.
Yeah, I'm definitely singing from the same choir sheet as you in terms of efficiency. Rowan, would you add anything there?
I mean, Jaime's talked about where LendFlow is going. I think Eric kind of talked about best practices. So I'm going to go a slightly different direction and maybe give an example of something we rolled out. So that way we have across like an example, where we're going and best practices. So I'm going to talk about, I've mentioned this previously in terms of our document fraud feature that we launched recently, but I thought I'd go a little deeper on kind of the why, the how, and how we actually made that happen. So just some context, we have an income verification product. Really our goal is to help our customers easily verify income and employment for the users. We do to 3 mechanisms, Plaid, obviously we have bank connection. So we allow consumers to connect their bank account and we can actually look through the transactions and pull out income information. We also have a payroll solution. So you can, connect your payroll account. So think ADP, Workday. So we, similar to our bank connection widget, we have an experience where they can connect a payroll account. Now, payroll and bank, they're both data from the source, so there's less of a fraud concern there. But we do have this fallback option where, many consumers want to upload documents. They're so used to uploading documents. So we did have this mechanism for verifying income where we would allow consumers to upload pay stubs or tax documents and use that in to substantiate their income. I think that's kind of where we saw a massive amount of fraud. So there was a consistent refrain from all our customers saying, hey, like this is a big problem. We're seeing so many fraudulent documents, and that's kind of what really spurred us to act. I think I've mentioned this previously where, we obviously hadn't really built up a repository of fraudulent documents for us to actually go out and do a full-fledged monitoring exercise and build a solution in-house. So I think we started really looking externally pretty quickly because this is a big pressing concern for our customers. We evaluated a bunch of partners and kind of landed on Inscribe. And so we rolled the solution out. I think there are 2 big benefits that we've seen from this. The first is, of course, like Inscribe provides, a risk score that can easily be used in decisioning. But I think as Jaime mentioned, there's a lot of context behind that score. So, you just don't get, hey, this is a fraud document, but you also get, this is why it's a fraud document. Like this font has been tampered with, this looks like a template, this field was actually manipulated. And I think that's very valuable information. And it's also easy for our customers to understand like why something's being called fraudulent. And sometimes maybe if it's not a critical field, maybe they're okay. Like, if I change something which is not going to really change my decisioning, maybe I don't really want to go back and have the user provide something else. I think there's also a second component to this, which is really streamlining operations, right? A lot of times, if your portfolio is hit by fraud, then you almost have to throw an army of people to actually review everything that's coming through. So you have to necessarily make things very manual. And so I think we've talked a lot about this controlling fraud aspect and like flagging what is fraud. But I think there's also an efficiency thing where if you can do this at scale and you can automate a lot of these processes, you can actually, make decisions much faster. You can, maybe, not have as many people, staff as many people. I think that was a secondary benefit we saw of actually, having a solution like this. And especially when Inscribe, like the decision came back, like the scores and the signals came back in about 30 seconds, right? So it's almost in real time that we can, a customer can say whether this looks like a fraudulent document. I think that was something which is very compelling for entire customer base.
Yeah, it's so advantageous to use like an automated solution over having a manual review team. And yeah, it frees those people up to do kind of more like high value work that, machines aren't as good at. So, it's a win-win solution. It's quite a painful experience to have to sit and manually review hundreds of documents. We do our fair share at Inscribe, so I can attest to, I prefer to do other things with my time. So yeah, definitely benefits to using an automated solution. Yeah, one strategy that I'd like to talk about is that many of our customers kind of will use a step-up verification strategy. So similar to step-up authentication, when during like the login process, a user is asked to provide additional info to prove their identity if and only if something is like unusual or suspicious looking. So like, for example, if someone fails like the ID check or gets like flagged for a closer look, you can then ask the customer for additional documentation like a bank statement or utility bill. This kind of you can kind of almost call it coordinated friction. It ensures that you're only introducing friction for your customer where you need it and when you need it. Yeah, before we head into our Q&A, do our panelists have any last minute advice or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
I just want to jump in on the step-up verification. We've seen that as a super helpful technique as well. So maybe suspicious login, you want to MFA that user, or someone signing up and your KYC looks okay but not great, like do a document verification and selfie verification. So something we've seen as super helpful. We've seen some customers try to be like perhaps even like more secure, like doing that all the time, but that can also affect conversion. So step-up authentication can really help balance like security with the user experience and conversion.
Yeah, I think there's also this benefit to this. So when you think about any kind of risk score, right? I think at the extremes, it's kind of where it's easy to make decisions. So if it's something that's blatantly fraud, or something is just looks so good, I think that's easy to automate. But there's this giant portion in the middle that you obviously want to keep shrinking, but I think it's that middle portion where things like step up and additional verification really is beneficial, because you're not really sure which way you want to decision it. And I think that's where kind of adding specifically for that population, adding more steps, I think is kind of where we see a lot of value.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Right, I think that we will start our Q&A. So we have a couple of brilliant questions lined up. The first question, what questions should you ask your frontline analysts and investigators to assess what their biggest challenges are and determine the right solutions for them? I'll just open it to all panelists if anyone wants to jump in and answer.
I may have a couple thoughts around that one, and it has to do with what Eric mentioned before, right? Like, look at the data. I mean, yes, ask people in your organization how they're doing it, but look, I mean, record the data. When things happen, make sure that you're doing a postmortem or whatever, or you're somehow like keeping track of what fraud you're encountering and how is it happening. And then I think we touched on some of the things before. I mean, I'd say, think about what your particular use case is and how important certain things are, right? Can you tolerate a little bit of fraud? Can you not? Will that kind of like break you? And also, like, what are your timeframes? Like, do you need an immediate response? Do you not? And in a way, it also ties back to what we were saying about what's your process to step up a verification. And I think that varies based on everybody's use case, right? Is it higher volume? Is it lower volume? So do you need to automate more? And what's your tolerance to maybe let some things like kind of slide by in exchange for being able to automate a bigger part of your volume.
I think in addition to obviously having candid conversations with the frontline staff, I think it's also important to put in a disciplined process of looking at the data. So a simple thing could be you look at X number of cases where the fraud score was very low, or like it indicated no fraud, but it eventually ended up being fraud. And similarly, you want to look at X number of cases on the other side, where even though the fraud score is high, you want to manually review those documents to see if actually do those documents look suspicious. So having just a process around regularly reviewing, hey, I'm going to look at a few cases on either extremes, I think allows us to actually be honest about how we're doing. And I think it's a good way also to get a sense of like what new fraud trends are emerging and what we should be solving for.
That actually ties quite well into our next question, which was, how do you deal with false positives or false negatives? And you were kind of touching on it there a little bit, I guess, but I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
I think generally you start looking at the false positives, false negatives, and start thinking about what signals we're firing or not firing, or what things did you miss, what rules might you want to add. But there's always like a trade-off between false positives and false negatives, and I think customers have to be maybe clear on like where they want to be in the spectrum of risk, because you can, try to catch all the fraud, but you're gonna have lots more false positives, or, you can try to reduce false positives and, probably miss a few things. So it's all about, I think, helping customers understand where they are on the spectrum, and then make efforts to kind of play whack-a-mole with the false positives and false negatives, and add signals, change thresholds, to make it a little better.
Yeah, it's a bit of trial and error for sure. Jaime or Rohan, would you add anything to that?
I mean, I'd say it's a little bit the same thing, right? I think we've touched on it a couple of times. Some of these questions are dependent on what your particular use case is, right? So like, how deep can you go into these files? Or, I mean, can you do that? Can you not do that? And that's going to define what your tolerance should be. But hopefully with the tools that we have, you don't have to make that compromise. Like I was saying, you don't have to, have it be a 1-for-1 trade-off. And down the road, you can automate more of this. Also, having the assurance that you're catching what you want to catch. But again, I think it depends on what type of volumes you're dealing with and what your particular use case is.
I think the way we look at it is, we find an example, then we try and understand why this example fell in either a false negative, false positive bucket. So let's take, for example, a document that ended up being fraud, but for some reason the whatever model we had said it was low risk. Then you try and come up with a hypothesis of, was there anything about the document that could have suggested that it's high risk? Then you see if that hypothesis makes intuitive sense, and then you try and test it on a larger subset, because you don't want to anchor too much on the specifics on a particular document. So you want to make sure that whatever hypothesis you come up with kind of can somewhat generalize across a larger document. So I think that's kind of how you start with an example, come up with a hypothesis, then you test the hypothesis by 2 simple tests. Does it make intuitive sense? And then does it actually scale to the rest of the portfolio? And if it does, then that's probably a signal that you should now be considering into your next iteration of your risk model.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, next question. When you're looking to get budget and approval for fraud detection tools, how do you explain the pain and justify the cost to your higher ups?
I can go first. I think there's some like hard costs when it comes in this space. So like fraud can directly just cost you money. And so you're saying 50 basis points of fraud, like that's a direct dollar figure that you could reference. Some of the pain could be like operational in nature. So if you're spending a lot of like time and human resources reviewing cases, that's sort of like automating it could have a direct dollar figure when you add up people's time and salaries, what else they could be doing, their opportunity costs. And then if you could get into like the land of like false positives and user friction conversion, and again, you can kind of explain like what's the value per user that you have, and like what's the drop off in the funnel and where's their value there. So I think you can justify like the pain and the cost with some of those hard metrics. And even in today's like day where like budgets are getting cut, or growth could be slowing and people are tightening their purse strings a little bit. I think if you reference those numbers, you can still justify those things pretty strongly.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question around, how do you know if you're the right person to pitch a potential solution to your department or team leader? That's an interesting one.
I mean, I can take it if you want, or it's, I don't think there's a right person, right? Depending, and again, I think about this also from the perspective of a startup where, like everybody should raise their hand. But I don't know why anybody who feels like they can improve a process, or anybody who like, is listening to this webinar and it's like, hey, I have an idea because I heard something that we're not doing. Couldn't go and just bring that up. I don't think that's something that happens maybe at a specific level of the organization. Maybe traditionally does, maybe like, like heads of departments and things like that are typically controlling these kind of policies. But I think anybody should go, and if they identify a way to improve or a gap that's not covered, they should suggest alternatives.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think we want to make it such that everybody in the organization feels comfortable raising problems that they see and saying, look, this is a problem, this is a potential solution. I think this ties a little bit into kind of what Eric was mentioning, which is, once you have this mechanism where like you have people develop this intuition about, what fraud can be, what it can cost you, then, a lot more people are going to be looking out for problems. Now, when it comes to eventually making a decision whether something, I think there are two orders of decision, right? First is, should we go fix a problem? And the second thing is like, okay, how do we fix the problem? And, what is going to take to fix the problem? I think that's where maybe we get to realms of a decision maker, because at the end of the day, everybody has finite resources, and it's a question of which problems should you be, focused on fixing. And then that's kind of where you kind of do a little bit of an ROI analysis in terms of maybe I'm okay tolerating, this kind of fraud because it's like very expensive to fix it, or it's like very hard to fix it. And maybe it's better use of people's time to go fix another problem. So my mental model is to just make sure that surfacing problems comes from everywhere in the organization. Everybody has a good sense of intuitively, like what is driving the business, what things are important for the business. And then making sure that everybody's comfortable raising problems and potential solutions. But then I think then you do tend to have decision makers around like, what is the final, like, should we do this or, do something else instead? And I think that's where it typically tends to be like a head, like, someone in product or like a head of department or something of that sort.
Yeah, I would, I think it's ideal to say like everyone in the organization can bring up problems. I think sometimes different organizations can, I don't know, not everyone's in that world, unfortunately. So, I do try to set that culture for like the team, and, try to even select workplaces where it's like that. But if you're not in one of those environments, it can be tough. But I think it's about building a strong case and potentially thinking about it and seeing like how your idea is received, and possibly you have to bring in other people to like give you advice on how to make your case, or make like a joint pitch together. So you kind of have to feel it out, but no one likes organization politics, but they sometimes do exist, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think the point you made around getting some metrics, I think goes a long way in terms of, and it's very easy to say, hey, this is a problem, we need to fix it. But then kind of backing that up with, look, this is a problem and this is how much it cost us, the last 3 months. And those are two vastly different things when it comes to actually convincing people to take action.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question, what are the top criteria I should be looking at when evaluating a fraud detection tool? And we kind of, we would have mentioned this throughout, I guess, when we were talking about, latency or reliability. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear if anyone had anything to add to that.
I think even if we're a little bit redundant, we can just touch on what we said before. But I think you just said it, Luis, and it's, if you're, you got to consider if it's the right tool for your particular use case, but does it spot the fraud that you needed to spot? So make sure that you're testing the right things, before you actually open the floodgates. And then, so what turnaround times do you need? Do you need to be very fast? If so, are you willing to accept maybe a little bit less accuracy? And does it really serve, the purpose that you need? Like, are you looking, are you looking to screen for identity theft, synthetic identities? Are you looking to screen for documents? Like, what kind of documents? Maybe like not everybody supports every kind of document. So like, think about, what your priorities are in terms of I would say three things: accuracy, timeliness, and cost. And yeah, and just weigh your options.
I think you mentioned a fourth one in there, which is like coverage. Data coverage can be important too, of like types of documents, geographies, but I'll also echo like accuracy can be very important. Maybe there's some other features that matter to you, like workflow features, tooling, like maybe it's like no code rule engines, for example, might matter to you, or SAR filing might matter to you. Explainability, we mentioned earlier, could be one as you select tools in this space that I think stand out as well.
Okay, so we have time for one last question. Where do you go to learn about fraud detection tools?
I can go first. I think I mentioned previously that the feedback loop with our customers, I think, are a very important source for us. Just kind of, hearing from them in terms of what they're seeing in their portfolio, I think has been immensely valuable. At Plaid, we also have, a good business development team that also keeps their ears and eyes open about, what are the trends, what are new companies in the space, what kind of problems are being solved. I think that's also been a pretty valuable source of information for me personally.
And maybe add like certain newsletters that keep track of venture funding rounds, for example, could be a place where I hear about new people if it's not from customers. So it's another place.
Okay, so I think we are just about at time now, so we will have to wrap up. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to all of the questions, but I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our panelists for giving their time and their expertise today. Yeah, and I'll pass it back over to Todd now to close it out.
All right. Well, thank you, Louise, and thank you to our panel. I think there was a lot of interesting information presented today. Special thanks to the audience, whether you're listening live or if you'll be listening to the video after the fact. Thank you for your attention. And another special thanks to Louise and the team at Inscribe for their continued partnership and support. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and come back soon. We'll have plenty of other content, both virtually and in person. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.